Imagine a lavish dinner party in 17th century France. Guests in fine attire gather under chandeliers and golden trim. The host, proud and refined, brings out the main course, not roast pig or peacock, but seasoned flesh made from the ground remains of an ancient Egyptian mummy. Guests partake without hesitation. This scene, though shocking by modern standards, was once part of a widespread and accepted practice across Europe. For centuries, Europeans consumed the preserved remains of ancient Egyptians. They ground them into powder, baked them into bread, infused them into wine, and treated them as both medicine and delicacy. This disturbing trend did not originate from malice or mockery, but from a series of historical misunderstandings and cultural fascinations. Beginning in the 12th century, European scholars gained access to Arabic medical texts that praised a substance called mumia, believed to have potent healing powers. The term referred to bitumen, a black, sticky substance with antiseptic properties, sometimes used in Islamic medicine. However, Europeans misunderstood the word and assumed it referred to the blackened remains of Egyptian mummies. As this mistranslation took hold, mummy powder began appearing in pharmacies across Europe. Physicians prescribed it for everything from headaches and bruises to internal bleeding and epilepsy. Mummies, they believed, held powerful curative properties because their tissue had endured for millennia. This belief was reinforced by the theory of sympathetic medicine, which argued that preserved tissue could pass its durability on to living flesh. In this worldview, consuming a mummy was not grotesque, it was practical. During the Renaissance, the fascination with ancient Egypt intensified. Explorers returned from foreign lands with artifacts and stories that sparked Europe's imagination. Egyptian relics in particular became coveted status symbols. Owning a mummy was a sign of sophistication and worldliness. Trade routes shifted from spices and silks to sarcophagi and human remains. European merchants displayed mummies in shop windows alongside rare goods. Apothecaries stocked mummy powder beside herbs. Mummies were not merely relics of the past, they were ingredients of medicine and markers of prestige. The elite classes took this obsession even further. In salons and drawing rooms, unwrapping parties became fashionable events. Aristocrats invited friends to observe the ceremonial removal of ancient bandages. Wine was served, music played, and the body of an ancient Egyptian was slowly revealed for the amusement of the crowd. These events, though horrifying by today's standards, were viewed as both scientific and elegant. Even artists joined the craze. A popular pigment called mummy brown was made from ground mummy tissue. Painters used it to create rich, earthy tones for portraits and landscapes. For centuries, the dead adorned canvases across Europe, their identities lost beneath layers of oil and varnish. Famous figures endorsed the practice. Francis Bacon praised mummy-based medicine as a cure-all. The royal physician to King Francis I of France prescribed mummy powder. King Charles II of England developed his own elixir, the King's Drops, made from human skull and powdered mummy. These were not the experiments of charlatans, but the prescriptions of respected thinkers and rulers. Even literary giants like Shakespeare referenced mummy medicine in their work. The consumption of mummies had become normalized in European society. The practice endured for hundreds of years. From the 12th to the 18th century, medical textbooks consistently included mummy preparations. Apothecaries sold it as readily as any other standard remedy. The belief in its efficacy spanned generations, supported by tradition and the absence of scientific testing. For many, mummy medicine was not a curiosity, but a trusted staple. As demand grew, so did the mummy trade. Tombs across Egypt were looted, and bodies packed onto ships bound for European ports. These shipments were not treated with reverence. Mummies were broken into smaller pieces to fit into crates. Merchants prioritized profit over preservation. Grave robbers raided tombs nightly, removing dozens of bodies at a time. Egypt's archaeological heritage was dismantled and scattered across the continent. Eventually, the supply of ancient corpses could no longer keep pace with demand. Merchants turned to deception. They began creating counterfeit mummies using recently deceased bodies. Corpses from hospitals, prisons, and battlefields were embalmed with bitumen and spices, wrapped in linen, and passed off as genuine antiquities. These forgeries were then sold to apothecaries or ground up and distributed as powder. Customers, believing they were purchasing the remains of ancient royalty or priests, were instead consuming the remains of criminals and paupers. The mummy trade had become a full-fledged industry. Some shops offered grinding services on site. Customers could choose their mummy, watch it pulverized into powder, and take it home fresh. The market was stratified. Wealthy clients purchased whole mummies, or so-called royal specimens. Middle-class buyers settled for priestly remains or labeled powders. Budget options, often dubious in authenticity, were marketed as commoner mummy dust. Some merchants mixed human remains with exotic spices to enhance the illusion. In the late 17th century, mummy banquets emerged as a grotesque social phenomenon. Aristocrats hosted dinner parties where mummy flesh was served as a delicacy. Prepared with seasoning and paired with wine infused with powdered remains, these dishes were enjoyed in luxurious settings. Bread was baked with mummy ground, sugar was mixed with powdered bone. Wine flowed alongside preserved human tissue, and the dead became a feast for the living. Some even compared vintages, claiming certain mummies tasted better due to age or origin. While most Europe embraced these practices, a few voices dissented. One was the 12th century Arab physician Abd al-Latif al-Baghdadi. During his travels in Egypt, he observed European looting and consumption of mummies. He condemned the behavior as barbaric and unworthy of civilized people. His warnings, however, were largely ignored. Eventually, the practice began to decline. The first cracks appeared when grave robbers admitted many of their mummies were modern fabrications. Trust in the mummy trade eroded. Then came the Enlightenment. Scientific thinkers began testing medicines instead of relying on tradition. They discovered little evidence that mummy powder cured anything. The idea of consuming human remains lost its medical credibility. Meanwhile, genuine interest in ancient Egyptian culture began to grow. Scholars deciphered hieroglyphs and studied burial customs. They realized that mummies were not curiosities, they were people, with names, families, and spiritual beliefs. This recognition sparked a cultural shift. The same societies that once hosted mummy feasts now condemned them. Museums began preserving mummies rather than grinding them up. By the 19th century, mummy medicine was no longer accepted and its history was quietly buried. The damage, however, had been done. Historians estimate that hundreds of thousands of mummies were destroyed during the height of European consumption. Countless tombs were emptied. Priceless archaeological knowledge vanished. What could have offered deep insight into one of humanity's greatest civilizations was instead consumed, literally. This forgotten chapter in European history offers sobering lessons. It reveals how cultural arrogance, scientific ignorance, and greed can combine to produce grotesque outcomes. The people who engaged in these practices were not monsters. They were often educated, well-meaning individuals within a flawed system of belief. They thought they were healing the sick and advancing science. Today, strict ethical guidelines govern the treatment of human remains. Museums emphasize respect and preservation. Researchers study the past not to consume it, but to learn from it. The tale of Europe's mummy obsession is a reminder of what can happen when knowledge is distorted, when tradition replaces inquiry, and when human dignity is sacrificed in the name of progress. The next time someone claims that a new health trend is backed by history, consider this. For over 6 centuries, some of the brightest minds in Europe believed that eating ancient corpses could save lives. They were wrong, and in their error, they destroyed a piece of the ancient world that can never be recovered.